When I was in seminary a number of years ago, we required reading for one book was this book called The Damnation of Thurwin Ware. Now, don't look it up on Amazon, and when you get at the bookstore, there's 50 other books that I'd recommend to you before you'd read this one. Actually, I read it just because it was part of an assignment. It's this fictitious story, and it's about this young Methodist minister who is on, I think, maybe his second or third appointment, and he's appointed to a church in upstate New York, a fictitious city, and he gets there and he's got his wife, he's got his children, and they go about just their normal life. He has this idea of writing a devotional book, so he begins to do that. He does his sermons. He visits people. They're engaged inside of the community. He engages other ministers in the city. He engages the civic leaders. And they're just living their life as you would expect that anybody would do that would be serving in this type of position. But it's not long before they're into just this way of life that he loses track of just the larger picture of who he is and what he does and why he should do those things. And it's not long after he loses track of that he ends up getting in all kinds of trouble. He almost wrecks his work, his ministry. He almost wrecks his marriage. He damages his health. And if it wasn't for just the goodness of this matriarch and patriarch in the church that receive he and his family in and sort of care for him, who knows what would happen to this guy. I had to read it for required reading, but I have to tell you, that story has stuck with me. And I've reflected on this for about 21 years now. And what sticks with me is this idea that we can plug along inside of our life where our heads are down and we're working, and our heads are down and we're involved in our family, and our heads are down and we're involved in our social life and things in the community, and we just plug along and plug along and plug along and plug along, and before long, just in doing that, we raise our head up and we look out and we realize that we've been adrift. We're just sort of out of touch, and we've forgotten things that were of utmost importance to us. It is possible to be like an ostrich, to just be living your life and to have your head buried down in the sand and engaged in what's right in front of you, that you miss all this stuff that's going on, maybe the larger picture. Let me give you some examples of this. Say, and I'll use my example, me. You can, I'm married. I'm married to someone named Brooke, and we have two children, Connor and Caroline. And so inside we can just get involved of doing things, of going to different events inside of just Brooke and I. Some events she has to go to, and so I tag along with her. Some of the events I have to go to, and she tags along with me. And we can just do that and do that and do that, and just plug along, plug along, plug along. And if we do that long enough, there is the possibility that we forget why we even loved each other in the first place. Just our heads are kind of down, and we're just doing our thing, and we just get in the rut of just managing the household. And before long, we've forgotten certain things. Maybe why we wanted to get married in the first place. That could happen. Or one of the reasons why we started this marriage relationship ministry about back in January is because we want to have these specific experiences where they're not the same for everybody, but they're just a chance for people to get out of that rut and to see again why they love the person that's next to them. But it can happen. Just plug along, plug along, plug along, and then you wake up years later and you realize that you've forgotten why. Or if not inside of a specific relationship like a marriage, maybe inside of the whole family dynamics. If you have children or grandchildren that maybe you watch over, I don't know what it's like in your life, but in our life, it's we have levels of calendars. We have a school calendar that has schoolwork, and there's work for Connor and there's work for Caroline, and they each have their own way of doing that and what's required when. And then there are events inside the school. It might be social events. Maybe it's football games. For us, it was a homecoming weekend this past weekend, and so they each had their own schedule there. And then there's all these things that they'll be doing for school, and then they have their own social groups and social networks. And so part of their calendar is Connor going here and Caroline going there, and we do what is called divide and conquer. I don't know if you ever have to do that. That's where Connor's got to do some things, and so either Brooke and I will be over here, and we're one of us is over here, and Caroline's got to do some things, and so she might if I'm with Connor, then she's with Caroline, or if she's with Connor, then I'm with Caroline, but there's all these things that are going on, and there's all these things on the calendar we have to do, and we can do those things, and before long we might even forget the whole purpose of what we're trying to create as a parent. Being a parent is not, at least, it's not just event after event after event. It's that we hope one day, we want to share our life this way to present to the world a mature young adult that can think for himself or think for herself. And if we forget that, then all we do is focus in on event. And we're kind of like that ostrich with our head down in the sand. And we look up one day, and all of a sudden they're out of our house, and we've done them a disservice. It can happen. Or maybe your work. And for me, I'll talk about my work here. I mean, you can look at all the stuff that we do around here from A to Z and different days, and what we're after, whether it be with children or youth, or whether it be with adult ministries, is to create all these experiences so that people can have these experiences, and they can either learn about themselves or learn about God, or they can serve and they can put their faith out into action, or there's times where we join together as one group and we worship together. And we can do all those and can be even successful at it. And yet we could also wake up years down the road, like our head's been in the sand, and we raise it up and we look out and we have forgotten why we want to do this in the first place. That the whole purpose of why we do what we do is so that people can come to experience this God and to know who God is, and then at the same time to come and to trust and to grab hold of and be with not just who this God is, but what this God does. It's easy to do this, to just plug along like this guy, this fictitious character, Thurman Ware. Just plug along, and then one day you wake up and you look around and nothing looks familiar. That's the guy in the text, the steward or the dishonest manager. He's going about his life, and then one day he wakes up and he realizes he has forgotten of what his charge was. And he gets in trouble. Ends up taking things for granted. Submarines, before there were GPSs and satellites, the way they would, they had maps that they would sort of navigate with, but every so often they'd have to get close enough to the top so that they could to the sea line, so they could raise their periscope enough to check out a larger picture to make sure that they could have their bearings and not lose track of where they're at, where they're going, what's most important. And so the reason why they would do that is because it's easy to miss something. It's easy to miss the larger picture of who you are and why you do what you do. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to remind you of that. I want to remind you first of who you are and why that's important. See, who you are is always in reference to God. And in the text, there was that verse I highlighted where it talks about this children of light. See, at first, this text sounds very, it's almost like it shouldn't be in the Bible, right? I mean, that Jesus would praise this guy that's stealing from somebody else and that he's dishonest. And most of us have no clue what to make of this text when we read it because it just doesn't make sense. But so you need to know a little bit about at least what Jesus and the original hearers understood about this concept of children of light, because it hangs on this. The audience definitely would have understood this reference. It gets lost on us because there's years separation between the time of Jesus giving this parable and to our day. And so let me tell you again what children of light means. Now, the idea is that this people who are supposed to be children of light, that they're to be what we call beacon people. To use Jesus' words in Matthew, they are to be the salt of the earth. They are to be the light of the world. And they forgot that. Now that anchors back into the Old Testament where you have what we call the children of Israel. Started with Abraham, works its way all the way down to Moses. And by the time Moses is there, they're a nomadic people. They're basically a bunch of nobodies. Nobody would pick them ever for anything. This would be the person that would always be picked last. They just were not. There wasn't people who were wanting to stack their team. They wouldn't stack their team with the children of Israel, not at all. They were slaves. They didn't have any identity. They didn't have a home. They weren't strong. There wasn't anything that people sought to. You didn't wake up one day and go, "Gosh, I really wish I was like the children of Israel." Nobody would do that. They're nobodies, and yet God does something with them. God brings them out of this time of enslavement, and He gives to them the things that they cannot get themselves. He gives them an identity, and He gives them a purpose, and it's all under the direction and the leadership of this God. That's the first, book 2 through book 5 of the Old Testament. And all that is elaborated on for basically the rest of the Old Testament. It's the very basic teaching in the Old Testament. What they could not do for themselves, God does it for them. Gives them identity, gives them purpose. And the idea was that they were to represent Him, so wherever they would be, people would look at them and see something distinctive about them, and they would say, why are you this way? Who are you? And they would say, we are people that are connected to God. And they would do this thing, and they would live a life a certain way in hopes that other people wouldn't look so much at them, but to look at the God that they served. Well, that's what it meant to be children of light. And what they did was the opposite. Instead of it making it easy for people to see this God, they made it harder. And they created all these different rules, and they created ways to keep people out instead of inviting people in. And so He made it just incredibly difficult for people to connect to God. And so Jesus is reminding them who they are. That you're children of light. You've forgotten this. And just like this dishonest manager, you've taken things for granted, and you totally miss the whole purpose. And it starts with who you are. Now we fast forward that into the New Testament. We are, with them, the children of light. St. Augustine was a early church. We call it, he's 4th century if you call that early. But he was what we just a huge theologian. Call him the father of Western theology. And he wrote this book that is both difficult to read and yet at the same time it's thrilling. It's his Confessions. And it's basically an autobiographical work of his life. And what he writes about who he was, and then he writes about who he is. And the reason why it's so difficult to read is because he talks about his own brokenness. And and the levels of how his decisions that were made out of that brokenness led him down paths that he didn't know until he got so far down the path that he realized that it was leading to destruction. It was leading to misery for him. And then he also writes about the time where he's sitting in this garden in Rome, and actually there are children that are playing on the other side of the hedges, and he's just sitting there, and he's weeping because he's looking at his life, and it's empty. 100%. There's nothing that he enjoys about his life. And he hears children playing, but somehow in the process of hearing children playing, he hears, "Take up and read." And he looks down, and right beside him is this scroll of a bishop who was friends with his mama. And he picks it up, and he opens it up, and he reads it. And he realizes that God could even love him. He's reading about the book of Romans. And so he writes about what it means to follow this God and to become part of the children of light. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. It's also where we get his most famous quote because see, he never forgot that. He didn't want to take it for granted. He realized, he knew the depths of despair that he was in and what God had done for them, and he never wanted to forget that. And so he wrote in this confession that when he would look out and he would see people, and other people would see, "Oh, there goes this guy, or there goes this girl. They're worthless." And he would say, but by the grace of God go I." He never forgot his identity. Who he is. Children of light. And see, it's so easy for us to just, we put our heads down and we live our life and we're doing good things. It's not bad things. But we forget what's most important sometimes. Who are we? You belong to him. That's your identity. Don't forget it. It's easy to do. That's who we are. And see, the reason why that's so important is because what God gives to those children of light is not just an identity, who they are, but he gives them a purpose. And so that is to know, what do you do? Who are you, or what you do comes from who you are. See, if you lose who you are, then you will definitely forget what you do. And we'll be like that ostrich that sticks our heads down in the sand, and we're just plugged into this little area that's right in front of us, and we're clueless to everything that's going on top of us, going on around us. And so Jesus talks about this in this parable. He talks about everything that you are, that is to be a part of, to be used in such a way so that you make it easy for other people to connect to God. Not make it harder. That means what you say, how you act, the things that you touch, the things that you have. They're to be used as a way to be a beacon, a light, to be salt. I mean, even the steward is commended for using his skill set, because it makes it. He's not highlighting his dishonesty. He's highlighting the fact that if the children of light would be as shrewd as this guy, then people wouldn't forget. It'd be easy for them to be connected to God. And so we use who we are, what we have. There's a old Jewish proverb that says, what we do to those in need is accredited in the world to come. And so Jesus talks about this later on in the text. Be faithful. If you don't know what to do, be faithful with something that's little and learn to be faithful there. So when we're in little things, we can be faithful. So then when we can touch big things, we'll also be faithful there. But see, if you don't know who you are, there's no way in the world you can even understand and be faithful in whatever's set before you. So what we do comes from who we are. Who we are, children of light. What we do is make it easy for people to see God. And so everything that makes you you, whatever that would be, that's used to point people to Him. There's a guy during the Protestant Reformation, we read about the Protestant Reformation, and it's like reading just a part of history where we open up the books. So 1500s, Protestant Reformation, we turn the page. It's 100 years later, turn the page, 200 years later. It was actually a very difficult time. You had different cities sort of revolting against each other, and if we think that the riots that we have today, it paled in comparison to what was going on in the Protestant Reformation. All in the name of God, too. I mean, they were cities fighting amongst each other. They didn't have the National Guard, but every city had whoever the leader would be, the civic leader would have to come down and either keep the peace. And there were people on one side of the church and people on the other side of the church, and they're just living with the extremes. There was this one guy by the name of Francis de Sales. He ended up being the Bishop of Geneva. Now, if you know anything about the Protestant Reformation, Geneva was a hotbed of Protestant thought, mainly under the direction of John Calvin. And Francis de Sales was a part of the Catholic Church, and he was sent in. Basically, it was a suicide mission. Because as soon as he walked in there and would try to reestablish that aspect of the church, people would come down on him. And there's so many accounts of his life where he's having to run, basically just one step ahead of all those who were running after him, and with the idea of wanting to kill him, even kill people that were part of his life and who were connected to him. He made up his mind that what he wanted to do was to take things that he saw about the Protestant Reformation that was really, really good, and take things that were part of the Catholic Church at that time that were really, really good, and bring them together, and so that they wouldn't be ruled by the extremes, but they would be a sense where they both could represent God, and that together they could be something like the children of light, and both sides could give a witness to those that were around them, and so that people would see God clearly. He wrote this book called The Intro to a Devout Life. And what was significant about this is he published it for everybody. And so you had a Catholic priest doing something that was incredibly Protestant, put it in the hands of the everyday person. And what he wrote about was not that all the Protestants are bad and all the Catholics are good, or all the Catholics are bad and all the Protestants were good. What he wrote about was, how does someone live just as a Christian? What does that look like? What does that mean? And he just laid it out there for people, and he talked about disciplines, and he talked about a life where your intent made all the difference in the beginning, where you got to get who you are down first. And if you understand that, then with God's help over time, you'll get what you do down right, but you got to start first with who you are. It ended up reaching both sides of the church. Of his accounts in different cities, about 25 to 30,000 families reconnected with the church because of him. It had to do with helping people understand who they are. He would say that the King of Glory doesn't reward servants according to the dignity of their office, which means it doesn't matter if you're on this side or it doesn't matter on that side. It says the King of Glory said what's most important is not the office that you serve, because depending on the office that you serve, how you live your faith out, it might look differently. He says, but what's most important is they hold what the king holds people accountable for is the love that they give, the light that they shine, the humility that they show. Said the measure, if you want to measure to love, it's the love without measure. If you want to know how well we're doing when it comes to our faith, it's how well do you live a life, an authentic life with God, where being connected to Him oozes out, where people look at your life and they see clearly what it means to follow. That's what's most important. It's easy to forget who you are. And if you forget that, you won't know what to do. You know, Jesus said, there's that part in the very beginning, don't squander. The wording there, don't squander the opportunity. You're part of the children of light. That's who you are. And that'll determine what you do. Let's pray. Lord, it's easy for me, and maybe I'll start the prayer this way. It's easy to forget the larger picture. And I would imagine that there are other people just like me. And so whether that manifests itself in faith, whether that manifests itself inside their families, inside of their closest relationships. So remind us again who we are so that we know what we to do. This we pray in the name of Christ. Amen.